You may have noticed that one of my musical projects is called Hund, and I made 3 albums from this project, a trilogy of albums from this musical alias. And I'm assuming most of my viewers know who Hund or Hund or Torresson was as an historical figure, but for those of you who don't, this is a video for you. And the second half of the video I will go into the history of weapons a little bit. So if you want to only watch the first half of this video, it's mainly about the history of the figure, then you can cut off at a certain point in the video. I'll probably put a time stamp to when you can go ahead and end this video if you don't want to hear about the rambling about weapons, because I would like to talk about the spear. In my Norse culture video titled Norse Culture and Hate, which you should probably watch, by the way, because I find it pretty important, I described the Viking Age as a period of decay, and that there is more negative than positive to be found in this era, depending on your perspective, of course. This is coming from the perspective of a Norse pagan / animist. And the era that Torresson inherited is a good example of this, of decay. It is estimated that Torresson was born around 990, and he was born on the archipelago of Lofoten in Norway, western Norway. And it's thought that he was born in Hålogaland. I don't think that's certain, but it's what we are to assume, and it's what I assume, since so many accounts of his history can be found there. He was a chief in Hålogaland. And if he was born around 990, he would have been around 25 or so when King Olav II, Christian King Olav the Fat, became king of Norway. Around 1015. And Torresson had a concept of what Norway would have been like in the times of his great ancestors. Unfortunately, this man grew up in a time where his country was falling apart. The system in Norway was becoming more and more centralized when it had before been largely decentralized formerly. And you saw the attempted uprooting of the inheritance by blood system that had been in place in Norway, and really still is. They didn't manage to entirely get rid of this, obliterate it. You can still see it in today's Norway. People still inherit large tracts of land through blood. In fact, people own entire lakes. So they didn't manage to entirely sweep away this part of Norway's culture, fortunately, but they tried. And around this era, it's really evident. The king had taken a lot of land from Norwegians, and charged them a hefty tax to each family. And Torresson witnessed this. And again, he had an idea of what would have been like before for his ancestors, which drove him to stand up against this. King Olav II was a key asset in spreading the poison of Christianity across the lands of Norway, and Hund was a devout pagan. So people like him were really in the way of this, and the values that Torresson stood for, tribal values. You see, Norway still in tribes. And of course, the political tool of Christianity and those who spread it, from the perspective of these people, that doesn't look good. It works largely against them, comes hugely into conflict with what they are trying to achieve, and it should be emphasized that Christianity was brought to Europe as a political tool. It means nothing to Europeans. We are told that it means something, but really it means nothing. It was brought as a political tool, a subjugational tool. From the eyes of the people who are trying to spread it, this is a big problem. When we have a tribal system, tribes aren't good, because tribes relate to blood, and Christianity is anti-European in the biological term. And tribes work against a centralized system. So of course, Thor Thordarson and his kinsmen had decided, enough is enough, we have to do something about this. So when King Olav II had left for Russia in 1028 AD, Canute the Great had taken the reins of Norway, became king, and he was king of Norway, Denmark, and England, mind you, in what is called the North Sea Empire. And interestingly, Thor Thordarson had served in this empire for some time. When King Olav returned 2 years later to reclaim this kingdom, by this time Thor Thordarson had formed a peasant army, and he led this revolt to Stiklestad in 1030 to meet the forces of King Olav. And King Olav's armies were defeated. King Olav II himself was defeated. And it is said that he had 3 wounds, which we are led to assume that was by 3 men, and we actually have good documentation of the names of these 3 men. These men were Kalv Arneson, Thorstein Taurismed, and Thor Hund. Now, this is the point in my video where I'm going to make the point that we should be very careful when researching the story of Thor Hund or Thor Thordarson, because what we largely receive oftentimes is a saint's image, a saint's tale. And this has been twisted by Christians over the centuries, and a version we are often fed is that King Olav II was the hero in the story, but really the victim. And this is meant to present him as some kind of Christ figure, helpless, wounded, and eventually dead. And I think the spear is focused very heavily on, because a lot of people say that Thor Thordarson wielded a spear and that he finished the job, which there's no direct evidence that he was the one to give the last blow to kill King Olav. But it is said by many that Thor Thordarson wielded a spear. Do I think that this is largely influenced by the saint's image? Because the saints seem to think that all 3 of these figures, which aren't made up, I don't see a reason that the names would be made up, but what they represent supposedly in line with the saints' story are biblical figures. One would represent Judas, one would represent the Roman that lunged the spear into the side of Christ, which probably didn't happen, but, and I can't really remember the name of this Roman, L-O-N-G something. Who said I knew everything? Anyways, these three men's names, I don't see why they would be made up, but what they supposedly represent in the Saints version, the Saints Tale, is clearly bogus. I mean, it's even said that King Olaf in the tale saw a group of angels come down and grab him, because that's the kind of thing you would be able to document historically. Don't expect rationality from Christians. I would like to focus on the spear theory, just because I think that it is focused on so heavily because of the saint's image, because of the significance of the spear, which kind of funny. The Jesus figure dying on a cross, tree, and then stabbed in his side by a spear. That sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? But I think the spear is focused on heavily because of this. Nonetheless, I think the spear is a likely weapon that he would have wielded, because looking back into the Iron Age, the northern Germanic communities were more so reliant on imported iron, whereas the southern communities more so had direct access to it to craft iron weapons like swords, which were even then relatively expensive. A big misconception about the Viking Age is that when you hit the Viking Age, swords explode all over the place and they're suddenly a less expensive weapon, which this isn't the case. Even into the Viking Age, swords were still exclusive to more wealthy people. And in the Iron Age, it wasn't until the late Roman period that we even start to see double-edged German swords, and these were inspired namely by the Spatha, the Roman Spatha, and the Germans, as you should probably know, had plenty contact with the Romans, not only in battle, but some went to study in Rome and obtained dual citizenship that way, and some served as auxiliaries in the empire. So the northern Germanic communities and the ones to the south really always kept the, even up into the Viking Age, kept the spear as a very prevalent weapon. And into the Viking Age, even though swords, double-edged swords, started to become more common, it was more so for the more wealthy people, and spears were a dominant weapon, both the spear and the axe, which the axe there was heavy focus on in terms of its evolution, the different types of axe heads that would be created. You had the bearded axe, and then eventually you had the Dane axe, which, of course, the concept of a great axe in fantasy is that it's some big, bulky thing that really a person in real life wouldn't want to carry. And because of this fantasy image is very unattractive to me. It kind of ruins the immersion. But the Dane axe, in actuality, was a fairly light weapon. It had to be, because who would want to carry something huge and bulky and heavy? Even though the blade was quite large, there were various types of blades on the Dane axe. So it wasn't just one type of blade, one type of axe head. The Danes even used this to climb walls. So, I mean, it had to be a relatively light weapon, at least lighter than is depicted in the insane fantasy image. And then you see the evolution of the spear, too. You see the winged spear. So the spear still became a highly prevalent weapon. And later in the medieval period, of course, by this time, people had obviously seen what can be achieved through range. So pole arms greatly evolved later in the medieval period. You started to see things like halberds and poleaxes and various pikes. So range was important, has always been, really. And it's not like the spear was some idea introduced in the Iron Age. I'm not trying to imply that. The spear is very, very ancient. Could have been used for potentially up to 1 million years. I mean, our ancient Neanderthal forebears hunted with them, so not unique to the Iron Age or Viking Age whatsoever, obviously. Not trying to imply that. So for this reason, I think that Hund or Thoresen, it was very likely that he used a spear. Of course, these are minute details. I don't think they influence the story well. That's just my opinion. The man is obviously more important than what weapons he used. Not that weapons can't have a spiritual significance, but still, how brave and important this hero was. That's the key here. And that's the focus of my video, really. Thoresen is a very important figure in my life, perhaps the most significant historical hero. And do I have a deeper connection than many people because of my Germanic descent? Yes. That being said, I think he is a hero to all of Europe. He is meant to be a hero to all of Europe. He stands for our pagan values. He stands for freedom, and he showed bravery and honor in what he did. So, this video is dedicated to you, Thoresen. Thank you for what you did for us.